and welcome back to VR Bump on Game & Muscle videos, where we take a scalpel to VR titles, pull apart the flesh, and peer on in at the details. In this episode of VR Bump, we're jumping into Wick Chronicles, which is a first-person wave shooter that aims to chuck you, to some extent, into the John Wick film world. Now, it's fortunate that we've got another wave shooter because there's hardly any in VR, and it's a genre that's highly underrepresented. But with that said, in terms of the actual content that you get, you've got a training environment, and you have 3 main stages. Now, those 3 main stages are linked together with sort of story interludes, so you can play them through one after each other, as if it were a sort of single-player story. But you can also go in and just load each level individually and then just compete for a high score, with the game including a fairly extensive local as well as online leaderboard system. Now, in terms of the actual gameplay, unfortunately John Wick has suffered some kind of lower body paralysis. Maybe he was shot in the spinal cord, and as a result he can't move through the levels. So the gameplay does take place with you static in one spot, but it is 360 degrees around you, and the game actively encourages you to look around, and you will find yourself wrapping yourself in your HTC VIVE headset cord on occasion. Those of you that were fans of the arcade classic Police 911, a nice thing with this game is that it does encourage you to use cover, and you will benefit from ducking behind objects, and in fact it's a necessity to survive later parts of the level. That said, the NPCs in this game went to the Hollywood aiming academy, where they generally fire a lot of bullets and very few will hit you, even if you're stood up. And when you're in cover, you don't have to be particularly aggressive with your use of cover. You just have to be vaguely behind it, and the AI seem to lose the ability to shoot you. So I guess it's consistent with the film. Now, in terms of how the weapons actually handle, they're really enjoyable to fire, and when you're playing the game in the arcade mode, you just reload your guns by dragging them to your waist and lifting them up. So it kind of gives you that sort of Time Crisis duck to reload vibe. But where I think the weapons really shine, and what makes them feel really punchy to fire at a basic level, is the actual gunshot sound effects. They're just really, it's got a really nice smooth punchy hit to the fire when you actually shoot the weapons, and makes them feel more responsive than they actually probably are in terms of the design and animations that go on. Aiming of the weapons to me feels a little bit off though, in that I seem to automatically shoot lower than I'm expecting. Obviously if you look through the crosshairs and aim with the gun that way, it's perfectly fine and accurate. It's just when you're aiming without looking down the gun, it seems to go a little bit lower. And I think it would be nice if, with this game, and I think with any first-person shooter in VR, they need that mechanic that you've got in Space Pirate Trainer, where you can adjust the angle of the guns as you're holding them, because I think different people have a different expectation as to where the gun's going to be pointing to. That said, after about half an hour or so of playing, you learn where it's going, and you can start shooting people without looking down the sights. But the guns, on the whole, I think are just really nicely done. Now, the grabbing of objects and the interaction and putting things down, at times it's a little bit clunky, it's not perfect, but again, it's the kind of thing where it's different from one VR game to another, and it kind of just takes about 25-30 minutes to get used to each game's implementation. There's nothing in the implementation of this which completely ruins the game. It could be a bit more smooth, it could be a bit more precise in some ways, but it's fine. Of particular note is the way that you can pull the pin out of a grenade by pulling the grenade up to your mouth and then throwing it. I thought that was really fantastic, and I'd like to see that in other games. Also, being able to dual wield a pistol with a sniper rifle is totally absurd. It's more like, rather than being John Wick, it's more like you're some kind of deranged Arnold Schwarzenegger from an 80s blockbuster, but that is fun, so I don't really care. And dual wielding different weapons is always, it's just entertaining. And I think approaching the game in that sort of 80s Hollywood blockbuster mentality will get the most enjoyment from it. Lastly, on the subject of gameplay, when it comes to the difficulty, it can get a little bit tricky, and there's no sort of pausing or saving mid-level. So if you die towards the end of a level, which is going to happen more often than not, you then have to restart it, which is a rather cheap way of increasing the playtime of the game. It's not terrible, but it can be a little bit annoying. Also, the levels just feel a little bit drawn out. Obviously, it's because they don't have that many stages, so they've tried to elongate it and increase the amount of playtime from the game. But it would have been a lot nicer to have more stages that were slightly shorter, or even better, for them to completely rip off something like Time Crisis with you moving through a stage. That would have been incredible with this game and the way the gunplay operates. But it's early days in VR. Maybe that will come soon in the future. One can only hope. Moving on to the graphics, I think visually this game looks pretty nice. Now, it's Unreal based, so you get all the advantage of the Unreal Engine lighting. It doesn't look as good as your standard AAA PC game, but on the scale of VR titles, I think the environments look nice and immersive. The texture's really nice. One thing definitely worth saying, though, is that things look a little bit blurred and out of focus, even on the highest graphical settings with the highest anti-aliasing, the highest textures. What I ended up doing to resolve this was I had to run the game at least 1.2 super sampling, which of course then puts more demand on your system and of course will make the game require a faster computer to actually play it with those settings. Having read what other people have said about the game, it does also appear that it is quite a demanding game at a basic level. But with our system, which is a GTX 1070 as well as an i7-6700K, both of which slightly overclocked, even though we were recording, it ran well for the most part, with it only going into reprojection on the occasions where things got super busy on the screen. So all, in terms of performance, I think it's quite a heavy game and you will need a good system to get the most out of it. I probably wouldn't bother if you've got a really slow computer, but those of you with moderate computers, I'm sure can get it working to a decent level. But as I say, unless you can up the super sampling, it's going to look a bit blurred into the distance. So in conclusion, I say John Wick is a really fun game to play, but it suffers from a lack of content, and I also don't think it's that replayable compared to something like Space Pirate Trainer, which in many ways is less detailed and has less going on in it. It just doesn't compel me in the same way to want to keep playing over and over and over again, which is a shame really, because I think the training mission where you're just shooting at targets is really compelling and really enjoyable. I just think they need to approach the actual pacing of the training mission and how the scoring is done in that to make it into something that could be really, really addictive, if not every bit as addictive as Space Pirate Trainer. And then the levels that they've got, again, they just need to spruce it up in certain ways to make it more compelling to be replayable, rather than it feeling somewhat of a chore to get through. All in all, it has some really nice ideas in it, some really well executed aspects of gunplay and design to accommodate room scale VR, but it just feels as if it's lacking in certain areas and maybe isn't as fleshed out as it could be. I think people getting this and going into it without particularly high expectations will really enjoy it, but if you go into it with high expectations expecting it to be a really solid, fully fledged arcade shooter, then you'll probably feel a bit disappointed. But there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. There is our scalpel-like review of John Wick in virtual reality. I just hope he gets his legs fixed for the next film, otherwise it's going to be a rather interesting movie. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to click the subscribe button, don't forget to click the like button, and don't forget, as always, to write an abusive comment pointing out exactly what we've got wrong. I'm sure someone will, and we'll try and correct it if we did. So until the next review video we do in virtual reality, thanks for watching and goodbye everybody.